Hello, psych students. Professor Zeeb here, and welcome to our short lecture on sleep abnormalities. So we're going to briefly cover some of our sleep disorders or any kind of disturbance in sleep that psychologists have noted. So let's get started and go over some of our different abnormalities. By far, the most common one in terms of being reported is called insomnia. And an easy way to define this is it is lack of sleep. This could be caused by several things, including stress, caffeine use, alcohol, temperature. I don't know if you're like me, but it needs to be cool when I go to sleep, so temperature can create problems. Noisy roommates. So really the causes for this one are diverse. And typically we would treat this in relation to what's causing it. But of course, we could use things like drugs that induce sleep. Anti-anxiety meds, for example, could also be used. So once again, it kind of depends. Our next disorder is called sleep apnea, which can be a cause of insomnia once again. Sleep apnea, just an easy way to describe this, is the person is failing to breathe when they are sleeping. In fact, they may wake up gasping for breath. So we know this can be dangerous for your heart. It can cause headaches and obviously sleepiness during the day. This one can be caused by several things, including obesity, some type of obstruction. Let's say if the person had large tonsils or some kind of irregular nasal passage. In other words, the airflow is not appropriate. And then we also know brain abnormalities are associated with this one. The treatment for this is going to depend on what's causing it. So if it's obesity, we would have the person lose weight. If it's some type of obstruction, it could be surgery. Sometimes people wear oxygen masks at night, or they wear some type of retainer in the mouth to keep the airflow appropriate. So once again, the treatment is catered towards the cause. Next, we go to narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is different from our first two because here the person is getting irresistible attacks of sleepiness during the day. So in other words, when we're typically active during our circadian rhythm, we're finding this person may have these attacks of sleepiness, which are very hard to avoid. What's interesting about this one is that we know approximately 70% of the cases experience cataplexy, which is a form of weakness or paralysis, or it may be difficult to move. We also know that some cases report vivid dream-like experiences while they're awake. So it's kind of a bizarre thing. In fact, I remember reading that they have blamed UFO sightings, or at least some of the UFO sightings, on this. In other words, the person may have had narcolepsy and was seeing these vivid images in a dreamlike state, and they thought they were experiencing aliens. So I thought that was kind of interesting. What we've discovered with narcoleptic folks is they lack this chemical orexin. In fact, we've discovered that they may lack neurons that produce this particular chemical, which basically allows us to stabilize in terms of being awake. So due to the lack of this chemical, it may be related to these issues. So as you can imagine, our treatment for this one would be stimulants. That's our typical treatment to keep these people alert. It can also be treated with antidepressants as well as other drugs. So treatment does vary, but stimulants seem to be a pretty common treatment. Next, we go to sleeptalking and sleepwalking. So sleeptalking, it turns out, usually happens in stage 2, but certainly can happen in the other stages of sleep. Sleepwalking, on the other hand, is usually during stage 4. And this one we're kind of concerned about because people do really just bizarre things during this experience. For example, they may cook or take showers. There's been some cases of people, crossing the street, so obviously it can be dangerous. So I actually have a story in relation to this one. My nephew, when he was younger, often would sleepwalk, and my sister was preparing for this big party, apparently, and she'd made this big casserole the night before the party and had put it in the refrigerator overnight. My nephew, he must have been about 4 or 5, had, started sleepwalking, and he had opened the refrigerator and stuffed his pillow in the middle of my sister's casserole, to her surprise, in the morning. So the point is that people just do really bizarre things when they sleepwalk. Typically, it lasts less than 15 minutes, and we know that most children do outgrow it. So this is something we see a lot in kids, and we have found that pretty typically they do outgrow it, but not always. It kind of depends. Next, we go to nightmares, which is pretty self-explanatory, a bad dream. But really what we're going to focus on more in terms of this is something called a night terror. So a night terror is like a nightmare times 10. It's the state of extreme panic where the person's heart rate accelerates, their breathing accelerates, they may even flail around, depending on the case, and possibly scream. So in other words, we have found that when people are reporting this, typically it's children once again, they report a simple image or some type of scary feature that they may be reliving. So we know that this one often occurs with trauma, more specifically something called PTSD. So that stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. And we think this may be one way that we're trying to cope with some type of trauma we've experienced, whether it's severe child abuse. Some of our soldiers come back from combat with this, where they're reliving the battle, that kind of stuff. We know that night terrors are pretty common after we've dealt with trauma. Usually it happens in stages 3 and 4, according to the research. We know it's more typical in children. And scientists have also discovered it's more likely during a fever. So during times of illness or extreme stress seem to be the factors that trigger this one. Next, we go to periodic limb movement disorder. Some of you may know this as restless leg syndrome. So here, as the name implies, the person has an urge to repetitively kick their leg or move their limbs. As you can imagine, this would cause problems trying to sleep. I've heard people explain this one as, that sensation you get, let's say a spider is crawling up your leg, and you get that creepy crawly kind of tingling sensation, and you do everything in your power to get it off and stop it. It's kind of similar to that. We think that people may be getting some type of sensation or urge to kick and move their leg, which creates problems sleeping. This is one of those ones that seems to be more common in older age, after 50 in this case, and we really don't know what causes it, but certainly it can occur in other ages. Hypersomnia, which is kind of the opposite of insomnia. This is where the person complains of excessive sleep, but simply cannot feel refreshed. So for example, here we have a case where someone is sleeping all the time and still cannot get enough. For example, we have cases where people are sleeping 18 to 22 hours a day, almost the entire day. They may be sleeping and still can't get enough. We have linked this one to brain damage. We have also linked it to mood disorders, including depression. However, we don't know exactly what causes it. Our next one is a really bizarre one, and that's called REM Behavior Disorder. Here, what we're finding is that when the person goes into REM, they may possibly start to flail around their arms and may actually walk around. So it's kind of interesting because if you remember from our previous discussion, during REM, our large muscles are typically relaxed. Here we have a case where the person may actually fail to inhibit that, and they will start to move around and be erratic. This is another one we're not really sure what causes it and seems to be pretty rare. The last one we're going to talk about, and quite frankly, I love this one, is lucid dreaming. So we're not saying this is actually a sleep disorder per se, but it is a kind of unusual experience of sleeping. So to put this one bluntly, it's where you're asleep and you're dreaming, but you're aware that your dream is a dream. So I want you to think about what that means. In other words, you're somewhat conscious during the dreaming episode. So we have cases of people who, when they're dreaming, they know it's a dream, and they're able to make decisions and change the direction of their dream. I just think that's such a cool thing, to be able to control your dream and kind of sort of control that and guide it as it sort of flows. So the reason we think this is happening is we discovered that during this experience, part of the brain becomes aroused, more specifically the frontal and temporal cortex. Those two areas of the brain, we think, become more awake and allow the person to be somewhat conscious, but still relaxed enough to sort of experience sleep. So that would explain why they can make decisions and they're aware that it's a dream, is that part of the brain is actually aroused, even though they are still technically asleep. Okay, so this concludes our short lecture on those sleep abnormalities. Please progress to the next step in the class.